May 17th, 2012, Naples, Florida. Donna Summer lay dying, her once powerful voice reduced to whispers. The woman who had commanded stages across the world was now confined to white sheets, her lungs ravaged by cancer. But in those final weeks, she did something she had never done in 40 years of fame. She told the truth about Giorgio, the entire truth. Her closest friend sat beside that bed, recording every word, and what Donna confessed was this: he used my voice like an instrument he could control. I used his genius like a ladder I could climb. But before we learned to hate each other, there was one summer in Munich when we were just two people making sounds in the dark. And that's the only real thing that ever existed between us. Before we dive deeper into this revelation, if you're fascinated by the untold stories behind music's greatest legends, subscribe to this channel. We uncover the secrets that shaped the soundtrack of your lives. The story begins not in glamour, but in desperation. Donna Summer was 25, divorced, broke, and stranded in Munich, performing in a struggling production of Hair. Giorgio was 34, an Italian producer with failed records behind him, working in a basement studio, trying to prove he wasn't washed up. Neither knew their collision would birth a sound that would dominate the next decade. When Pete Bellotte first heard Donna sing, he immediately called Giorgio. "You need to hear this voice," he said. But when Donna walked into Musicland Studios in late 1974, something shifted. She wasn't conventionally beautiful. She was tall, awkward, shy. But when Giorgio asked her to sing, she opened her mouth and a sound came out that seemed to originate from somewhere deeper than her throat, somewhere primal. What Donna revealed on her deathbed was different from Giorgio's diplomatic interviews. Giorgio looked at me that day like I was a machine he'd just discovered in a junkyard, she whispered. Not a woman, not a person. I was a sound he could shape. And I let him because I was so hungry to be anything other than broke and unknown that I would have let him turn me into whatever he wanted. For 6 months, Donna and Giorgio worked in that basement almost daily. Giorgio was experimenting with synthesizers and drum machines, layering sounds that felt like the future. He needed a voice that could match the cold precision of machines with human warmth. He needed someone who could sound like sex without sounding cheap. Donna needed money, a visa, proof that leaving America hadn't been a mistake. So when Giorgio started asking her to make sounds that weren't quite singing, just extended vocal expressions that would become "Love to Love You Baby," she did it. Even though closing her eyes and making those sounds in front of men, microphones, and the cold efficiency of that studio was almost unbearable. What nobody knew was that something else was growing besides music. Giorgio was married. His wife lived in Munich. Studio sessions ran until dawn, and in those hours, with just the two of them and humming machines, something happened that neither publicly acknowledged until Donna's final confession. "We had an affair," Donna admitted from her deathbed. "Maybe 3 months, but it was intense when you're creating something you know will change your lives." She struggled to breathe. He would finish a mix, we'd listen in the dark, and then we'd end up on the couch in the back. His wife didn't know. Nobody knew. And that secrecy, that wrongness, it fed into the music. You can hear it if you listen carefully. That's not just performance. That's actual desire mixed with guilt, mixed with ambition. We were using each other even then, but we hadn't admitted it yet. "Love to Love You Baby" started as a 3-minute demo. But Neil Bogart of Casablanca Records played it at a party 20 times in one night. He called Giorgio the next morning, Make it 17 minutes. Giorgio thought he was crazy. Radio wouldn't play it. But Bogart offered American money, distribution. This was the break Giorgio had waited for. So he called Donna and told her they needed to extend the track. I told him no, she confessed. I couldn't make those sounds for 17 minutes. It was one thing for 3 minutes. But 17? That was performing an extended sexual act in audio form. I felt humiliated. But Giorgio convinced her. He told her this would make her a star in America. He told her nobody else could do what she could do. He told her what she needed to hear to overcome her shame. Over 2 long nights, Donna Summer recorded what would become one of the most controversial records in history. The 17-minute version was 3 segments, each featuring Donna's voice in simulated ecstasy. Giorgio layered synthesizers, strings, created a hypnotic sonic bed, but the centerpiece was Donna's voice, moaning, sighing, building, subsiding, building again. By the time it was finished, even Giorgio seemed uncertain. "Is this music or pornography?" he asked late one night. Her response was bitter. "It's whatever sells." The record sold beyond imagination. Released in November 1975, Love to Love You Baby reached number 2 on Billboard. Donna became famous overnight. But she wasn't known as a singer. She was the woman who had an orgasm on record. 22 times, the media claimed. Radio banned it. Churches denounced it. The BBC refused to play it. Men looked at her differently. "I became a sex object based on sounds I made fully clothed and uncomfortable," she told her friend. "Giorgio created a persona I had to live inside, and it was suffocating." Giorgio was hailed as a genius. Nobody talked about manipulation. Nobody asked whether the power dynamic was ethical. And this was when their relationship truly soured. Their romance ended after Love to Love You Baby became a hit. Giorgio's wife found out, Donna revealed. She suspected something. She gave him an ultimatum, and he chose her, which I understood. But the way he did it was cruel. He just stopped. Stopped the late nights. Stopped the intimacy. Stopped treating me like anything other than a voice he'd purchased. And I realized everything between us had been transactional. But they still needed each other professionally. Casablanca wanted more hits. Giorgio had the sound. Donna had the voice. So they continued, producing albums through the late 70s that defined disco, a love trilogy, 4 seasons of love, Bad Girls. Yet every session became a battle. Giorgio wanted to keep me in the sex goddess box, she explained. Every song had to have that breathy quality. I wanted to be taken seriously as a vocalist. But the more successful we became, the less power I had. The formula was working. Why would they let me change it? By 1977, disco was exploding. Studio 54 opened, and Donna's music became its soundtrack. But behind the glitter, her relationship with Giorgio was deteriorating. We barely spoke directly, Donna recalled. Everything went through managers, lawyers. In the studio, it was cold, professional. He would tell me what sounds he wanted, I would produce them, and I'd leave. There was no collaboration. I'd become a machine that made the noises he programmed. The breaking point came during Hot Stuff in 1979. Giorgio wanted another slow, sensual track. Donna refused. She wanted rock with guitars and energy. For the first time, she put her foot down. I told him I was done being his sex doll on record, she confessed. I wanted to make real music. He was furious. He told me I was ungrateful, that he'd made me, that without him I was nothing. A screaming match in Musicland Studios followed that nobody ever talked about publicly. Giorgio threatened to walk away. Donna threatened to break her contract. They compromised. Giorgio would produce hot stuff with rock elements. The song went to #1. Donna won a Grammy, becoming the first black woman to win in the rock category. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it widened the rift between them. Bad Girls in 1979 was their last collaborative album, marked by tension. They barely communicated. After it, Donna wanted out. She wanted to work with other producers, escape the disco box Giorgio built around her. But the real break came in 1982. Geffen Records wanted her to work with Quincy Jones. It was prestigious, a chance to prove she could succeed without Giorgio. Then, days before its release, someone leaked unfinished demos to the press with stories claiming Donna was difficult, that she'd lost her voice, that her best days were behind her. Donna always believed Giorgio was behind the leak. She had no proof, but she was convinced. Who else had motive? She asked from her deathbed. Who else would benefit from me failing without him? He wanted to prove I was nothing without his production. And maybe he was partly right. Maybe I was his creation. But he was also mine. We created each other, and then we destroyed each other. Giorgio always denied involvement, but their relationship never recovered. For 30 years, they rarely spoke. When both were inducted into halls of fame, they attended separate ceremonies. The partnership that had defined an era became a cautionary tale about ego, control, and the price of art. Throughout the 80s and 90s, as disco fell out of fashion and Donna rebuilt her career with gospel-influenced music, she struggled with the legacy of those 17 minutes. She became a born-again Christian, and the contrast between her sacred beliefs and secular past created an internal conflict she never resolved. I prayed about that song for years, she confessed. I asked God to forgive me, but it never goes away. It's what I'll be remembered for, no matter how many other songs I recorded. Giorgio made sure of that. He trapped me in those 17 minutes, and I could never fully escape. As Donna's health deteriorated in the early 2000s, friends encouraged her to make peace with Giorgio. She always refused. Some wounds don't heal, she said. Some betrayals are too deep. What Giorgio and I had, it wasn't love, even when we thought it was. It was mutual exploitation dressed up as partnership. In 2009, when Donna released Crayons, her final album, there was briefly talk of Giorgio producing a track. Donna shut it down immediately. I'd rather retire than work with him again, she told her manager. That was final. In those final weeks, as cancer ravaged her body, Donna Summer finally articulated what had taken 40 years to understand. Her friend sat beside her bed, recording her words, knowing they rewrote music history. Giorgio Moroder used my voice as an instrument he could control, Donna said slowly. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a tool, and I let him, because I was desperate and ambitious. But I used him too. I used his genius, his connections, his studio. I climbed on his back to get where I wanted to go. We were both using each other, and neither wanted to admit it, because admitting it meant acknowledging that what we'd created wasn't built on mutual respect, but on mutual exploitation. She paused, coughing, her daughter helping her sip water. But before we learned to use each other, before the betrayals and decades of silence, there was a moment. Maybe 3 months. There were nights in that Munich studio when it was just us and the machines, and we were making sounds nobody had ever heard. And in those moments, we weren't using each other. We were just two people creating something new. That's the only real thing that ever existed between us. And that's what makes it so sad. We had something genuine, and we destroyed it by turning it into business, into fame, into money. Donna Summer died on May 17, 2012, at age 63. Giorgio Moroder, now in his 80s, continues working. The music they created together remains influential. Love to Love You Baby is studied in music schools. I Feel Love is considered one of the most important dance tracks ever recorded. The sounds they made outlived their relationship, outlived their resentment, outlived Donna herself. But what we now know is those sounds were built on a foundation more complicated than anyone suspected. They were built on ambition and desperation and mutual exploitation dressed up as partnership. They were built on a brief affair that ended badly and a professional relationship that became toxic. They were built on one woman's voice and one man's vision, and the uncomfortable truth that sometimes great art comes not from collaboration between equals, but from unequal power dynamics that leave scars. Near the very end, Donna's friend asked one final question. If you could go back to 1974, knowing everything now, would you still walk into that Munich studio? Donna was quiet for a long time. When she answered, her voice was barely audible. Yes, she whispered. God help me, yes. Because even with all the pain, all the resentment, all the years of feeling used and controlled, I still made something that mattered. I still made something that lasted, and maybe that's what using each other really gave us. Not happiness, not respect, not friendship, but permanence. We used each other to build something permanent. And in this temporary world, maybe that's not nothing. 3 days later, she slipped into unconsciousness. Within a week, she was gone. The Queen of Disco left behind 5 children, millions of fans, and a complicated legacy forever intertwined with the man who discovered her voice, shaped her sound, and used her just as much as she used him. If this story moved you, if it changed how you hear those classic tracks, subscribe to this channel. We bring you the untold stories, the confessions that come too late, the truths that hide behind the hits. Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder used each other. They admitted it, at least one of them did, when it was too late to matter. But they also, in those brief months before the using began, created magic together. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that they used each other, but that they couldn't find a way to keep creating without the exploitation, without destroying whatever genuine connection they'd once shared. That's the real story of Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder. Not just the hits, not just the fame, but the complicated, painful truth of 2 ambitious people who found each other at exactly the right moment, used each other to get what they wanted, and spent the rest of their lives dealing with the consequences. The Queen of Disco is gone, but her confession remains, and now you know the truth she carried to her deathbed. Giorgio used me, I used him, and the only real thing between us was buried under 40 years of success, resentment, and silence.